All right, folks, I got a bunch of cards from Galakrond's Awakening last second. I don't know how many are going to be in this video. I don't know if it's going to be all of them. It's happening as I speak. There's just stuff hitting everywhere. As you can see, the graphics aren't going to be great. So let's just get into this and do what we can do.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
So let's go ahead and start off here with the Steel Beetle for Druid, a new 2-mana 2/3 beast with the battle cry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, gain 5 armor. And that's really, really solid, right? You've got a nice vanilla stat line here with a super positive upside. It's not necessarily a high tempo play, but gaining armor is good. Any kind of defensive deck is likely to be running higher cost spells. Think about like Quest Druid, right? Running things like Hidden Oasis and Starfall. Boom, Steel Beetle fits in perfectly as a way to gain some life, buy time for the quest to do its thing. Even if this isn't a choose one card, it still fits into that kind of environment. Any slower deck that cares about armor for Druid could find a way to use this, I'm sure. I don't know if it goes in token decks with some of the other 5-spell plus stuff, but there is still that package with Anubis Defender and Garden Gnome that kind of support this line as well. So Steel Beetle looks strong, has some decks to fit into. This feels like a good card. So moving on here to a Bomb Wrangler, new 3-mana 2/3 for Warrior. Whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 1/1 Boombot. So we've got kind of a new Acolyte of Pain that instead of drawing cards, summons you Boombot. So instead of a resource-driven card, more of a tempo card. And I think this is pretty sweet. We've seen Acolyte of Pain work really well in Warrior in the past. Obviously, they have the Warpaths and the Whirlwind style cards to make that work. With Bomb Wrangler, this is more about addressing the board and, getting 2 or 3 Boombots out of this is pretty good. Just even getting 1 Boombot out of this, because this doesn't have to survive damage, so it's very, very likely to get you at least 1 Boombot. Still makes that a pretty good stat line for its cost, I'd say, particularly because the Boombot has some upside where it can kill some fairly large stuff or do some extra face damage. So yes, I could actually see this going into a more aggressive Warrior deck because that Boombot creates so much pressure. Could see this going into some kind of Enrage, Whirlwindy style deck, or maybe even a control deck that just needs to get stats onto the board that are likely to kill your opponent's stuff, which Boombots could actually do. So yeah, Bomb Wrangler, another card that looks like it has a lot of upside, some very good value on this one, and certainly fits what Warrior wants to do as well. Next up here is the Skyvateer for Rogue, a 2-mana 2/3 with Stealth and Death Rattle. Draw a card. It's also a pirate. So, I mean, theoretically, this has stealth. You stick it on 2, you follow it up with like a South Sea Captain. It's like, okay, cool. It's got a reasonable stat line for 2 mana. In theory, that's cool. In practice, I think it's going to be way harder to get any kind of real value out of this stealth with some kind of strong follow-up. Although there are a few that exist in Rogue and Pirates on board have some value. I just think this one's a little iffy. Plus, the Death Rattle is going to be really delayed here. It's like, when do you want to draw the card? Your opponent probably won't be killing this for you, so the card comes even later. The 3 health makes it kind of awkward to kill off, unlike like a Loot Hoarder, which is easy to kill off. So it feels like drawing the card's going to be delayed. I can't think of a reason that would be a good thing to do. Maybe there is some, but to me, this card just kind of feels awkward. I don't really know where I run this, why I run this, and how all these pieces come together in a favorable way. Maybe somebody more creative out there in the comments can find a line for this one, but to me, this just looks a little iffy. Moving on here to the Boom Squad. This is a super cool card. A 1-mana spell for Warrior. Discover a lackey, a mech, or a dragon. And I'm presuming here that this gives you one of each of the options. You don't get like 3 of the same. You don't get 3 mechs or 3 lackeys randomly. I think you'll get 1 of each, which is pretty cool in theory. But again, in practice, there are some really bad mechs out there. There are some weak dragons. And when you limit the pool that far, I think your chances of getting a good one are pretty bad. Plus, they all do kind of different things, which might sound good because you have flexibility, but keep in mind, like, if you get a bad dragon that does a specific thing and a bad mech that does a specific thing, you can't play this like saying, okay, I need a big threat, because you may not necessarily get a big threat because you take a chance. You only have that 1 dragon roll, right? If you say, I need some kind of reactive awesome lackey, your chances of getting the lackey one are reduced. So the flexibility here is almost more of a punishment, I think, than a real upside. That said, it is a 1-mana spell. It turns into something. Lackeys can generate even more, and I've always underestimated lackeys. If it's got a lackey in it, I think it could probably be decent almost no matter what. So maybe there's some deck that can fuse these 2 worlds together in a sensible way, or even these 3 worlds. But from a flavor standpoint, this card's super fun. From a playability standpoint, I see some more challenges for it. So moving on here, we have Explosive Evolution for Shaman, a new 2-mana spell that transforms a minion into a random one that costs 3 more. Now, we've seen some scary evolve stuff in the past with Shaman, like Mutate, most recently cheating out some really big stuff early in the game. I don't think this offers quite as much of that like tempo mana cheat possibility because this is 2 mana, so it's harder to squeeze it into in early game turn. I think of this as more like almost an early game buff in a way, where you hit that 1-drop or 2-drop earlier in the game and you follow up with Explosive Evolution to increase its stat line, maybe turning, a 1-drop into a 4-drop or a 2-drop into a 5-drop, which still I think does have the potential to be fairly powerful. Like, hitting a 5-drop that's strong on turn 3 could be good, but there's also those low rolls, right, where you hit those low stats and you really haven't done much, which I think makes this way riskier than something like Mutate, because you're spending a lot of mana on Explosive Evolution. So I do think this one's going to be way more awkward than a card like Mutate, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily terrible. It's probably good off of random generation effects. It might make the cut in a deck here or there, although I think typically this will get cut for like a straight up buff or something that just is a more reliable follow-up, because there is quite a bit of risk here for 2 mana, leaving this card in kind of a wishy-washy spot. Next up here we have Scalelord, a new 5-mana 5/6 dragon with a battle cry, give your Murlocs Divine Shield. I hope to God this does not make it into Battlegrounds, but the Scalelord here is an interesting theory in Constructed. We've seen this like Dragon Murloc hybrid stuff coming in Descent of Dragons and now Galakrond's Awakening. After trying to get that world to work, I don't really think it makes a lot of sense. And although Scalelord, theoretically, if that deck does work, this seems like an amazing follow-up card, right? You build that early Murloc board, you give it some sustain, some protection via Divine Shields, and you're really, really happy. The one problem with Divine Shields in Constructed, unlike Battlegrounds, is that they are still pretty susceptible to the Brawls and the Twisting Nethers and the universal removal cards of the world. So it's not quite as strong of a follow-up. It's more about onboard trading denial than like removal denial, which I think is the most susceptible problem for Murlocs anyway. So between the context problems for that world, with the Murloc Dragon hybrid decks, between Divine Shields being good but not like super duper amazing, I think Scalelord has some problems, and the likelihood of this card succeeding is low. The power level is, moderate, I'd say at best. Moving on to the Skydiving Instructor, a new 3-mana 2/2 neutral card. Battlecry, summon a 1-cost minion from your deck. Now, in theory, I'm sure this deck can do some cool stuff if you have a 1-drop that you really, really care about, like Northshire Cleric, for instance, where you need to get it into play. That's pretty interesting. Total stat line here, right? You're basically getting a 1-drop that you like for 1 mana, and you're getting a 2-mana 2/2 beside it with your Skydiving Instructor. The 2-mana 2/2, not particularly exciting, but you are filtering down your deck, which can increase the quality of your draws in the future. Plus, you're pulling, perhaps something you really like into the field as well. So it's okay that you're only getting a 2-mana 2/2. There's still some upside. Now, that said, I think most decks won't need to do this necessarily. They'd rather just run a good 3-drop, right, and hope to hit those 1-drops on curve. But I don't think this card's by any means unplayable. It does something interesting and specific, and there may be a deck out there that eventually cares about that. So this card looks fine to me. Moving on here to the animated Avalanche, a 7-mana 7/6 for Mage. And the battle cry reads, if you played an elemental last turn, summon a copy of this. So it's this nice, like really strong mid to late game follow-up for elementals where you get 2 big bodies. Think of like a Spiteful Summoner style play where instead of one part of it being weak, both parts of it are strong. And that's cool, right? A big board reload. Kind of crazy with things like Khadgar as well. If you're able to pull that off, you could get a really big board a little bit later in the game. And I think this does give Elemental Mage a little bit more of a minion focus that's possible. The question is still, right, like this is only going to be good in some kind of elementally driven deck. And is that deck going to make sense, right? So far, Elemental Mage hasn't made sense. I don't really think it's going to get there. So although this card looks pretty cool and it makes sense in a vacuum, I think when you consider the context, this one still has some pretty big challenges to overcome and probably isn't good enough to get Elemental Mage over the hump, at least in the short term. Long term, it's got some possibility. Next up here is the Rottenest Drake for Hunter, a new 5-mana 6/5 dragon. Dragon Hunter getting a little bit closer to viable, I'd say, here, with a battle cry that reads, if you're holding a dragon, destroy a random enemy minion. So it's a deadly shot attached to a 6/5 body for 5 mana. I think that's actually pretty insane. And particularly because sometimes random enemy minions aren't bad. Sometimes your opponent only has one big thing. You hit that like Tiamat, and you're like, yes, good job, Rottenest Drake, you did it. And you've made a really high tempo play that swings the game in a favorable fashion. So this could really fit into a Dragon Highlander deck quite nicely. There might still be some kind of, mid-rangey dragon hybrid deck out there as well for Hunter that just kind of plays a little bit more aggressively but needs some mid-game dragons or some dragons in hand. So the condition here, it is going to require dragons. That's a little bit problematic. Sometimes it's hard to get quite enough dragons into Hunter. But nonetheless, I think this card has a lot of playability, looks quite strong from just a raw efficiency standpoint, and we've already seen some Dragon Hunter stuff making sense, particularly in Highlander. So for me, Rottenest Drake lines up across all metrics. This looks like a very, very good card. And after a quick look, it seems like these are the only cards that are like confirmed as of right now. I mean, Galakrond's Awakening comes out in presumably 25 minutes. We still don't know if the leak cards are 100% real. There's still some missing cards. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this review in. There may be a follow-up review later with even more new cards or kind of closing the book on some of these final cards to get announced. So I guess stay tuned for that. In the meantime, let's go ahead and jump to the quick reviews for these. Steel Beetle is a 4-star card. Bomb Wrangler is a 4-star card. Skyvateer is a 2-star card. Boom Squad is a 3-star card. Explosive Evolution is a 3-star card. Scalelord is a 2-star card. Skydiving Instructor is a 2-star card. Animated Avalanche is a 3-star card. Rottenest Drake is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Again, there will probably be some kind of follow-up review of some sort. I don't really know what's going on either as much as you guys. It's just random cards here and there, but I guess stay tuned for that final piece of the Galakrond's Awakening puzzle. And in the meantime, thanks for joining me on this review. Share your thoughts on these cards in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.